From the headquarters of teleSUR English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gray. We start in Colombia, where an article published by the Wall Street Journal linking FARC member Iain Marquez with drug trafficking is putting the peace agreements between the FARC and the government of Colombia at risk. Political leaders are warning about how fragile the peace process actually is.
Presidential candidate and former peace negotiator Humberto de la Calle made a call to the people of Colombia, asking them to defend the country's sovereignty and to not let the opposition groups end in peace in the country.
Peace in the country is at risk. Uribe and Duque are spreading lies and hatred. They are leading part of the population to feel nostalgia for the war. The Constitutional Court has opened the door for Congress to betray the peace agreement.
The call of former chief negotiator comes after the arrest of FARC member Jesus Santrich and the publication of an article in the Wall Street Journal which alleges the possible connection between another FARC member, Iain Marquez, and drug trafficking organizations.
As soon as the Santrich case became known, I said that he should face consequences if found guilty. I thought this was an isolated case, but in light of what the Wall Street Journal said, some new questions have emerged. The article reaffirmed that there cannot be impunity for the members of the FARC, regardless of the rank. But given the national security interests, I think it is up to the Colombian justice system to decide.
And even though the public prosecutor's office has already said there is no investigation on Iain Marquez, the Wall Street Journal's article brings the possibility of achieving an already fragile peace agreement even further.
The Colombian army announced that the armed struggle in the Catatumbo region between the National Liberation Army and the Popular Liberation Army has come to an end. After 2 weeks of non-stop confrontation, the Popular Liberation Army said the conflict ended thanks to a petition by the civilian population who've been affected the most by the crossfire. The conflict has displaced more than 7,000 citizens.
El propósito es avanzar.
In Nicaragua, people are expected to gather again on Monday in a march called for by President Daniel Ortega to defend peace and dialogue. Over the weekend, thousands of Nicaraguans marched in Managua to demand the end of violence sparked by protests against the government's reform of the social security system. Demonstrators also gathered in the Metropolitan Cathedral for an open-air mass called for by the Catholic Church. Busloads of people from rural areas took part in the weekend demonstrations. After 10 days of protests left at least 11 people dead. Cardinal Leopoldo Brenes is sent to mediate the dialogue, and he said the church will wait for a month to see if the parties are committed to reaching agreements.
If the bishops of the Episcopal Conference evaluate that the government and the private sectors are not reaching agreements, we will let the worshippers, the people of God, know, and we will tell them we cannot continue to mediate like this, and that we couldn't do our job.
Meanwhile, the National Assembly approved the creation of a Truth, Justice and Peace Commission to examine the violent protests. The commission will include religious leaders, academics, lawyers, students and social organizations who will have 3 months to present their findings. The public prosecutor also launched an investigation into the protests. For their part, students asked for an independent commission to look into the events that created or caused the demonstrations. And our correspondent Fabiola Lopez has more from Managua.
This was a calm weekend for all Nicaraguans, as everything indicates they are all betting for peace and dialogue. Over the weekend, thousands of people from different parts of the country joined an homily called by the Catholic Church at the Cathedral of the capital of Managua. Also during the weekend, the National Assembly approved the creation of a Truth Commission that has to show results in 3 months regarding the investigations over violent protests. Today, people are expected to gather again, this time in Plaza de las Victorias, in a march called by President Daniel Ortega, also to defend peace and dialogue. We will keep you informed.
The Cuban Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez has criticized the interference in the internal affairs and the attempts to destabilize Nicaragua. The Foreign Ministry says it is committed to the principles of the Declaration of Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace and rejected the interference in the internal affairs of their sister nation, that is Cuba, commenting on Nicaragua. Venezuela is moving forward in its electoral process ahead of the May 20th elections. The National Electoral Council, or CNE, has just completed its latest audit. CNE experts, along with representatives from the political parties that will participate in the elections, worked on the evaluation together. So far, 5 audits are confirming the transparency of the electoral process. Venezuelans are being called to choose a new president and representatives of 23 state local councils during the May 20th elections. Presidential hopeful Luis Alejandro Ratti has announced he will withdraw the high-level Electoral Commission until there's a meeting with the candidates and the head of the National Electoral Council. Previously, the candidate Ratti confirmed on Twitter that he will remain a candidate that assures that all Venezuelans of different political opinions one will search for real national unity. To know more about electoral campaigns on the opinion polls, we go to our correspondent Iain Bruce in Caracas.
So the official campaign for the 20th of May presidential election is now into its 2nd week. President Nicolas Maduro was campaigning in Lara at the weekend. The main opposition candidate, Henry Falcon, was in the east of the country in Cumaná. We're expecting more campaign activities today in Cojedes state and around the country. Now, one interesting thing that did come out of the weekend was a new poll by the Hinterlasses agency. I should add a word of warning here. Election polls, public opinion polls in Venezuela are notoriously unreliable. In fact, for 15 years, most of the polling agencies have very clearly favored the opposition. They've given them very inflated numbers, and that has fed into the whole narrative of fraud when they don't get the results they expected. Hinterlasses is one of the 2 somewhat more serious polling agencies, although it has been accused of tilting towards the government. But if we can take seriously the results of this poll, the headline figures are not that different. They give Nicolas Maduro 51% of the preferences. They give Henry Falcon 28%. Small surprise here is that Javier Bertucci, the 3rd place candidate, the evangelical pastor, has 16% in this poll. That's somewhat higher than most people would have predicted. But there's an interesting figure behind the headline figures in this poll, and that's on the number of people who say they do definitely intend to vote or probably intend to vote. Now, 54% say they definitely intend to vote in this poll. 16% say they probably intend to vote. That's 70% saying they basically intend to vote. On the other hand, only 22%, only 18% say they definitely won't vote, and 12% say they probably won't vote. A total of 30%. Now that, if we can take those figures seriously, if they're accurate, that does suggest a significant decline in support for those traditional parties of the opposition who, of course, have been calling for a boycott in this election. Anyway, we'll see how this week plays out.
In order to address the economic blockade, Venezuelan Vice President Tarek El Assami announced a plan to help Venezuelan entrepreneurs who have been negatively affected by U.S. sanctions on the country.
Many of your bank accounts have been blocked as a consequence of the irresponsibility of the Venezuelan political class. What we have to do is to build an economic system that protects our productive sectors. And President Nicolas Maduro has already ruled that all entrepreneurs whose bank accounts are closed in the United States can ask for help so they can open new ones in Turkey, Russia, China, and other countries.
The 2nd edition of Expo Venezuela wrapped up in Caracas on Sunday. Around 400 private, public, and mixed ownership companies were chosen to build a foundation of a new productive national economy.
Companies have been converging in the Caracas Polyhedron Arena for the second edition of the Venezuela Expo. One of them is this sportswear brand. It makes 100% Venezuelan products and began exporting goods 2 years ago. Today, they make the uniforms for the Aragua Tigers baseball team and the Venezuelan Beach Volleyball League.
The idea behind this is that there is opportunity in everything. We are entrepreneurs. I am proud to be Venezuelan because that has allowed me to start a business based on a necessity, with an eye on helping our economy.
The goals of this expo are to move the country away from being a rentier state and to increase internal production. Here, you can find all kinds of companies, like this technology and electronics company, which has been in Venezuela for over 10 years.
Difficulties exist, we won't deny that. Companies like us depend on foreign currency, and we must be very careful in regards to our administration in order to participate within the outline of DICOM, the currency exchange system for our floating currency. DICOM gives us preferential currencies to be able to continue producing at affordable costs, so we may sell products in the domestic market with competitive pricing compared to transnational brands.
The Venezuelan cryptocurrency, the Petro, has been one of the exhibition's main attractions. During the opening, President Nicolas Maduro announced that in its first month of pre-sale, the Petro had collected $3.3 billion.
There are high expectations. People come to ask how to buy the Petro, what the Petro is about, whether or not it can be mined.
Of the nearly 400 companies that are participating in the Venezuelan Expo, 47% are participating for the first time. Inside and outside the arena, private, public and mixed ownership companies are set to meet until the convention wraps up on Sunday, making this second edition of the Venezuelan Expo a complete success. The agro-food industry is one of the most visible industries at the fair. Farmers and campesinos from around the country have traveled to Caracas to show what they have produced.
Despite the difficulties we face, we have not stopped. We are increasingly investing in genetics and improving our pastures so that animals are healthier, so that they have a better development.
Of the total number of participating companies, 165 come from the public sector, 190 are private and 12 are mixed ownership.
We're going to take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
And shoot them for what? They never called me nigger. They never lynched me. They never put no dogs on me. They never robbed me of my nationality, raped and killed my mother and father. Well, I'm going to shoot them for what? How am I going to shoot them? Them little poor little black people, little babies and children and women. How can I shoot them poor people? Just take me to jail.
Welcome back. 3 men who were sexually abused by a priest in Chile have described their private meeting with Pope Francis in the Vatican on Sunday as helpful and respectful. One of them, Juan Carlos Cruz, has tweeted about his 2-hour meeting with the Pope, saying the pontiff listened to him with great respect, affection and closeness. The men were abused by the Chilean priest Fernando Caradima back in the 80s and were invited by Pope Francis to visit the Vatican last week. The meeting is being seen as a change of position by the Pope, who initially defended the bishop who had covered up the priest's crimes.
With this gesture, the Pope is saying the Catholic Church should not cover up these acts in the future. This is going to provoke a type of earthquake within the Chilean church, especially within the church hierarchy. We're going to see what consequences this will really have on a practical level. But on a symbolic and moral level, this is going to be really relevant.
The last dictator to govern Bolivia, Luis Garcia Mesa, has died at the age of 88. He died on Sunday morning at a military clinic after successive heart attacks. The former dictator had been serving a 30-year prison sentence for crimes committed under his rule, including the deaths and disappearance of Bolivian citizens. The crimes date back to his rule during Operation Condor, carried out by Latin American right-wing governments in the 70s and 80s. And Brazilian President Michel Temer has cancelled his tour to Southeast Asia, which was originally scheduled for May 7th to May 14th. This is the second time Temer cancelled the tour. The decision comes after an ongoing investigation linked him once again to corruption. Temer was allegedly involved in money laundering in residences belonging to some of his residents, including his daughter. The Minister of Housing and the Environment, Romualdo Ferreira, has announced an effort to address the marine pollution, waste management, with the use of single-use plastics such as shopping bags, food utensils, straws, and fruit containers. All of these items will be banned in the Bahamas by 2020. Ferreira said his ministry will work to develop a phase-out plan and will embark on a nationwide public consultation and educational outreach campaign. He also said that plastic contamination is passed through the food chain, accumulating from prey to predator, and could ultimately reach the human food table. Food experts from China are in Bolivia looking at the Bolivian food, which could potentially be exported to China. Our correspondent Freddie Morales brings us more.
A committee of experts from China's General Administration of Supervision of Quality, Inspection and Quarantine have initiated a new phase in the audit of food production that could see food being exported to their country from Bolivia.
This involves looking at the sanitary conditions so that the products that will be exported will not present any issues for those who will consuming them. In this case, there are 7 products that are being prioritized.
Bolivia and China have strengthened bilateral trade in recent years with the hope of continuing growth.
We all know that bilateral trade between China and Bolivia has increased a lot, especially last year when the total value of bilateral trade reached $2.4 billion.
The two countries are negotiating to have Bolivia formalize sales agreements of 7 agricultural products.
We have laid the groundwork in order to streamline the entire process for the export of 7 Bolivian products to China. We are talking about soy, coffee, quinoa, sesame, chestnut, beef, and chia.
According to official information, agricultural production is one of the sectors with the highest rate of sustained growth in Bolivia. National producers have the capacity to formalize export contracts.
Bolivia, in recent years, has acquired a very large production capacity. Our producers are demanding external markets so that we can accommodate our agriculture production.
According to official information, China sold $2 billion worth of products to Bolivia, and Bolivia exported around $400 million worth of products to China. The new trade agreements will be defined in June when President Evo Morales makes an official visit to China.
The Anthropology Institute of Honduras and the Archaeology Institute of China have found mine ruins that are more than 1,000 years old. Both institutes are excavating a 4,000 square kilometer archaeological site in the city of Copan, which is in the east of the country. Experts are working with high-resolution camera drones to facilitate the investigation and work more efficiently. We're going to take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Sahid Javid has been appointed the new Home Secretary of the United Kingdom. He is the country's first Home Secretary from an ethnic minority group. He was brought in after Amber Rudd resigned on Sunday over her mishandling of the Windrush generation scandal. She was accused of setting up immigrant removal targets. Long-term UK residents from the Caribbean have been threatened with deportation to countries they left as children as many as 50 years ago and have not returned to since. Others have been denied access to health care, jobs, and have even been made homeless. The Shadow Home Secretary Diane Abbott has accused Theresa May of being responsible for the discriminatory Windrush generation scandal.
I think all roads lead back to Theresa May and her tenure as Home Secretary. Many of the elements of this hostile environment were originated under Theresa May, and most important of all, it was in 2014 that she passed legislation which removed the protection from deportation, which up until then had applied to Commonwealth citizens.
And we go now to our correspondent in London, Pablo Navarrete, who brings us more details over the political turmoil over the Windrush scandal in the United Kingdom.
The Windrush citizenship scandal claimed its first major political scalp on Sunday when the Home Office Minister, effectively the Minister of the Interior, Amber Rudd, resigned, saying she had inadvertently misled Parliament last week when she testified regarding alleged quotas in her department for the deportation of illegal immigrants. She had denied at the time that there were any, or that she was aware of any, and it later transpires, due to a letter published yesterday by the British newspaper The Guardian, that she had written to British Prime Minister Theresa May saying that they would seek to deport 10% more illegal immigrants, bringing her position under intense pressure from across the political parties, and she resigned yesterday, something that Theresa May agreed to. Now, the Windrush citizenship scandal has dominated the British media and political discussions in the last 2 weeks, centres around the children of Caribbean people that came to Britain, invited by the British government following the Second World War from 1940 to 1970, and who have effectively been deemed illegal immigrants by the British government recently in some cases because of their failure to regularise their status. There have been very powerful stories in the British media of the human cost of what's happened. People have been deported, they've been imprisoned, they've lost jobs, they've lost homes, and it has resonated and caused widespread anger not only amongst the Caribbean community but across British society. So now Amber Rudd has resigned, but there is now a renewed focus on asking about British Prime Minister Theresa May, who was Amber Rudd's predecessor and who first enacted the very harsh rhetorical and legislative policies with regards to immigration and making Britain a hostile place. So Theresa May is now facing a lot of pressure to answer for her role in all of this. Today, for example, there is a protest outside Parliament to protest the issue in general. Initially, it had been called to protest Amber Rudd's position, but now I imagine there will be calls for Theresa May also to resign. So this is the latest with the Windrush citizenship scandal.
We thank Pablo Navarrete for that report. Now, a number of military bases in Syria have been attacked with rockets by rebel groups. Here's more on that and other big stories from around the world.
Syrian state media Sana has said that rebel groups have attacked multiple military bases in Aleppo and Hama on Sunday. Dozens of pro-government fighters have been reportedly killed. Earlier this month, the US, UK and France bombed 3 facilities in Syria as they were allegedly part of a chemical weapons program. The Syrian government, however, said the claims were baseless and strongly condemned the attacks. A twin suicide blast in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, has killed at least 36 people and injured many more on Monday. 9 journalists were among the killed. The Islamic State has claimed responsibility for the attack. There has been a series of bombing in Kabul and other cities in Afghanistan this year. They were either claimed by the Taliban or by the Islamic State. In February, the country's president offered peace talks to the Taliban, which they apparently refused and responded by kicking off more offensive attacks. A Malaysian court has convicted a Danish citizen under a new law against fake news. He is the first person to be charged under it. 46-year-old Salah Salem Salah Suleiman was charged with spreading false news after he posted a video on YouTube accusing police of responding late to a distress call by a man under attack who later died. Police claimed they had responded immediately. Malaysia is one of the first countries to legislate on fake news. Critics say the law is aimed at curbing dissent and free speech ahead of general election in May.
And finally, Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro has announced that he will give a press conference at the closing day of Expo Venezuela in Caracas. Using Twitter, Maduro said that in a few minutes, important announcements will be made to the workers of the homeland from the closing of the Venezuelan Expo. The president also called on them to, quote, advance together towards a productive and prosperous Venezuela, a country with better conditions for our workers. And that story has brought us to the end of this news brief. But for these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Soini Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
Tenemos que presentar Sudamérica, Latinoamérica, como no las ven otros que le mienten a la gente. Nosotros le decimos la verdad.
Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. A team of journalists in 25 locations around the world. 3 broadcasts to convey our people's reality. From the South,